Have you ever thought about where the bad in the world today came from? In a moment, we will look into the secret events that led to the shame of a once glorious angel who is now a symbol of pride and rebellion. What lit a fire in Lucifer's heart that made him want to challenge the very nature of good? Come with us on this journey to find truths that could totally change how you see the endless battle between light and darkness. The journey to figure out these secrets starts right now. What was the first bad idea that Lucifer, the angel of light who came from God as one of the most powerful angels and whose creation was planned by Jesus, without whom nothing would be possible? What does the prophet John say? But it is very important to understand that because God is holy, he has nothing to do with making evil. So it makes sense and is supported by the Bible that all angels were created to be perfectly holy. However, Lucifer, the morning star, decided to rebel and seduce, and he took a third of the other angels with him. This was his free will. Following that important moment, Lucifer and his followers became bad beings, going against God's plans and being enemies of people. We can get a glimpse of this terrible change and the great spiritual fight that followed in the writings of Ezekiel and Isaiah. The dramatic fall of Lucifer is shown to us in Isaiah. How you've fallen from the sky, morning star. You who used to bring down the countries have been thrown to the ground. In your heart you said, I will rise above the stars of God. I will set up my throne on the earth's hollows. I will plant my foot on the clouds and look down at the people who live there. But what really got him in trouble was being thrown out of heaven and into the void. Before he fell, Lucifer had unmatched power and status as one of the cherubim that watched over God. This was a very important job in heaven. Ezekiel told us that he was the cherub that walked on top of God and was placed by God on the holy mountain. He was very high and walked among shining stones. He was thought to be perfect in beauty and knowledge until sin was found in him. Before we go any further with this amazing story, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next interesting story. Also, please leave a super thanks if you want to help this work. We can keep telling more Bible stories and spreading this message of faith and hope thanks to your gift. Thank you so much for your help. Going on, after talking about where Lucifer came from and his early rise, we will now talk about how powerful he was and how he would eventually fall. This part of the story tells what happened after he rose to power. It shows how his pride grew and how he planned to fight against God's order. Lucifer was the most important being in the universe because he was so beautiful and smart that no one else could compare. As a spinning cherub, he was the guardian of heaven, whose job it was to keep God holy and glorious. His home among the hot rocks of the holy mountain was a sign of how close he was to God and how important he was in the heavenly kingdom. Angel Lucifer did his job in Eden, which is the garden of God. This place, which was full of valuable stones like diamonds, rubies, and topazes, showed not only how important he was, but also how pure he was in the first place. Each gem that covered his body was set up on the day he was made, which was a sign of how perfect and complete he was in both beauty and knowledge. Lucifer was honest at first, but not for long. As time went on, the cherub's heart grew full of pride because everyone was always praising his beauty and power. His purity, which was once undeniable, was tainted by the appearance of a small but harmful sin. Based on what the Bible says, Lucifer's many interactions and deals turned him into a violent and sinful person on the inside. Lucifer, fooled by his own image and the idea that he was always wise, thought he was smarter than the Most High. This was the turning point in the corruption process. It hurts me to read how precisely Ezekiel describes this moment, showing how Lucifer's heart was lifted by his beauty and his mind was tainted by it. God had to do something when he saw how wicked Lucifer was being. The blessed cherub was thrown off of God's rock. This was the moment when he changed from being a guardian angel in heaven to Satan, God's enemy. Jesus' account of seeing Satan fall from heaven like lightning is a powerful picture that shows how quickly and completely he suffered this fall. Lucifer's rebellion wasn't a one-time thing. It started a chain of events that are still being felt today. After he fell, there was a war in heaven that tore the spiritual fabric of the world apart. There is still a fight between the forces of light and darkness, going on in both the heavenly and earthly realms. This story about Satan's fall comes after the 70 disciples who were sent out to preach the gospel and get ready for Christ's ministry on earth came back victorious. They came back happy, shocked to see that even the devils were obeying the name of Jesus. This was proof of God's power and an advantage against the forces of the first revolt. The story of Lucifer is a scary warning of how pride and power can lead to bad things. It teaches us that everyone, no matter how high up they are, can be tempted to rise above the place God has given them. The fall of Lucifer shows how important it is to be careful and humble if you don't want to end up like Lucifer. This part of Lucifer's story not only links the past and present in heaven, but it also sets the stage for the problems we will face in the future as part of this spiritual war that is still going on. As we go on, we will remember these lessons and remember that the fight between good and evil is still important today, just like it was in the beginning of time. Since Lucifer's dramatic fall from heaven, his story has been a stark reminder of how dangerous it is to be proud. Jesus said that he saw Satan fall like lightning. These words have been remembered throughout the years as a memory of a supernatural event and as a warning to everyone, but especially to those in spiritual or political power. During his ministry, Jesus used the time when his students came back from trips full of joy to teach them a very important lesson. They had seen God's power when they cast out devils in Jesus' name, but the real win was in staying humble. Jesus told them not to do it and reminded them that pride brought Lucifer down and is the root of all other sins. The story of Lucifer's rise to power and fall from grace is told over and over again in the Bible. It's emphasized in the Gospels, the letters, and the predictions. Paul worries about the danger of pride in 1 Timothy 3:6, comparing it to the fall of the devil. He tells leaders not to be spiritual beginners because that may make them fall for the same pride that put Lucifer in hell. Lucifer's pride not only brought about his own downfall, but it also tainted the paths that God had set out for them, causing them to turn away from him. Ezekiel 28:18-19 talks about how Lucifer polluted his holy places with his many sins and unfair dealings in heaven, which made other angels more determined to rebel. The result was so much damage that Lucifer was reduced to dust on earth. It was a horrible and shameful end for everyone who saw it. Some people think that the word trade that Ezekiel used refers to Lucifer's talks and pressures on other gods to join his evil cause. His actions were so bad that they not only hurt himself, but they also ruined the holy place where he lived in heaven, which used to be perfect and full of God's presence. Lucifer was thrown off of God's mountain after he sinned, which was a metaphor for being completely cut off from God's presence and favor. Being thrown out is said to have been God's doing. He went to earth and continued to live there, but no longer as a messenger of light. Instead, he became the enemy and the accused. According to the Gospel of Matthew, Lucifer will be punished for all time. When Jesus talks about the last judgment, he talks about the eternal fire that God has set aside for the devil and his forces. If you follow Lucifer's road, you will reach this place, the lake of fire, which is the end of God's punishment for pride and revolt, Ezekiel 28:17. It once more shows how Lucifer's pride is tainted by his own beauty and power. He used to be a source of light, but his pride twisted his knowledge, making him a source of darkness and loneliness. Isaiah also helps us understand Lucifer's pride by giving us a thorough look at his stated goals. In Isaiah 14:13-14, the 5 times he says, "I will," show that he is trying to rise above his place and become as great as God, which is a clear and determined act of rebellion against the Creator. The story of Lucifer is a strong warning of how shaky high rank and pride can be. The fact that he fell from heaven is a physical loss, but it also represents a deeper truth about sin and how bad it is. Today's spiritual and moral fights are like the first uprising in that pride is still a bad thing that can make even the most praised people bad. Let us learn from those past mistakes as followers of Christ and messengers of his message. We should walk with humility and be aware of the ways that pride tries to pull us away from the right road. We should be aware of how much we depend on God's grace and power in every choice we make, so we don't fall into the prideful trap that brought down one of the most beautiful beings ever made. As we continue to look into how deeply Lucifer disobeyed God, we now turn our attention to the 5 cocky things he said that showed he had completely given up on God's will. These comments, which were written down by prophets, not only show how much he praised himself, but they also show when he fell and what his goals were. The things Lucifer said show that he is carefully planning to take over God's place and power. The first thing he said, "I will ascend to heaven," shows that he wanted to leave his current position and take on an even higher one, where he would not only visit God, but live there forever. This wasn't just a desire to be close. It was an attempt to be as important and powerful as the Most High. The second, "I will raise my throne above the stars of God," shows that he wants to rule over the angels, who are often represented by stars in the Bible. Putting himself at the top of the angelic order, Lucifer wanted to be in charge of all the heavenly beings. His third comment, "I will sit on the mount of the assembly," shows that he wants to be in charge of God's government, maybe even to replace God's order with his own. Isaiah and the Psalms talk about the Mount of the Assembly. It is thought to be an important part of running God's kingdom and may have something to do with the coming government of the Messiah from Jerusalem. Fourth, "I will rise above the heights of the clouds," means that the person wants to go beyond even the obvious beauty of God, which is what clouds usually mean when they talk about God's presence. Lucifer wanted to be greater than God himself. He wanted a greatness that was as great as or greater than God's. "I will be like God" is the fifth and most telling statement. It says it all about his rebellion. Lucifer not only wanted to be strong, but he also wanted to take on God's qualities and power so that he would be as powerful and majestic as God. This is the peak of his arrogance and the point of criticism that can't be changed. This rebellion had terrible results, not only for Lucifer, but for everything in the world. He broke his relationship with God forever when he chose a path of pride and disobedience. Lucifer used to be holy and pure because God made him that way. But now he has a wicked and harmful nature that has taken its place. He had a huge and total change in attitude. Where there was once holiness, there was now corruption. His very nature turned against what God is like, and his presence no longer gave off light but darkness. It was such a big change that Lucifer couldn't even try to be like God, because, as the prophet Isaiah says, God doesn't share his glory with other people. Isaiah 42 and 43 stress that only God is real and that he is powerful beyond question. Through the messenger, God says that he will not give his fame to someone else or to statues. He says that there was no other God before him and there will be no other God after him, which shows that he is special and superior. Not only do these words remind us of how special God is, they also serve as a warning to those who, like Lucifer, might be tempted to rebel and take pride in themselves. To learn about the limits of creation and how pointless it is to try to take over as creator, read the story of Lucifer. The story of Lucifer makes us think about our own goals and the dangers that come with being proud. It's the worst possible example of what can happen when made beings don't follow the rules their creator set and try to rise above the role they were given. For people, the lesson is clear. We need to walk with respect and humility, knowing that we depend on God and not giving in to the pride that brought Lucifer down. As we continue to look at the deep effects and meanings of Lucifer's fall, We now turn our attention to what God said about being one and the specific aspects of Lucifer's sin that made it even worse. These thoughts are very important for understanding not only the rebellion itself, but also how it changed Lucifer and those who followed him forever. God says over and over that he is one and supreme in the works of Isaiah. In Isaiah 45:21-33, God says things that make it clear that he is the only Lord and Creator. He asks for things to show their reasons and proof, which is a direct challenge to anyone who claims to be God or have power similar to his. This text makes it clear that no one, not even Lucifer, who is very beautiful and smart, can compare to the one pure and saving God. Lucifer's mistake is called especially horrible for a number of reasons, making him not only a rebel, but also the one who started all the evil in the universe. First, his revolt was the first of its kind. No living thing has ever turned against the perfect and holy God. Second, Lucifer was made perfect and wise, which should have helped him understand more about God's glory and goodness. This makes his sin even more unbearable and horrible. Third, Lucifer was very important and had a special relationship with God. God gave him this place of power and let him do important work. The fact that he betrayed someone in such a high position makes what he did even worse. Lucifer's rebellion led to a big change in who he was and what he was called. From morning star, a name that meant he was honorable and pure, he changed into Satan, who is the exact opposite of everything God stands for. Even though he was kicked off his high post, Satan still has some of his old honor, which suggests that his impact and power are still important in the universe. The story of the Archangel Michael shows how tense things are between Satan and the heavenly forces. Even when he is fighting Satan, Michael doesn't dare to give Satan bad advice, because he knows that God is the one who has the power to do the final sentencing. This conversation shows how complicated the order of heaven is and how important it is to follow divine justice even when people are rebelling. In Isaiah 24:21-22, God says that Satan and his followers will be punished forever. He also talks about punishing the fallen heavenly army and the human kings, which shows that God's justice will reach everyone who joins Satan's rebellion. While the Bible doesn't give an exact date for Satan's fall, it's possible to figure out that it happened after the year 2000, which is when Genesis 1 says the world was first created. Since God thought everything he made was very good at first, if angels existed before the heavens and the earth were formed, their fall, including Satan's, must have happened after that. The story of Lucifer teaches us a strong lesson about the limits that God sets for living things and what happens when we try to go beyond those limits. God's insistence that he is one and his promise of justice remind us that our power and place come from and rest on the will of the one who made us. It is important to know this truth in order to keep creation in balance and to avoid the mistakes of pride and defiance that led to Lucifer's downfall. This part of the history of the universe not only shows the sad path of a powerful being, but it also shows how important it is to follow God's rules and laws with respect. This is an idea that has been around for a long time and is still important for all living things and gods. As we learn more about Satan's rebellion, we think back to the important time when the angels saw the beginning of the universe. According to Job 38:7, that moment was one of happiness and celebration for all the beings in heaven. It marked the beginning of a time of peace and divine order before there was any sign of resistance. Even though the Bible doesn't give an exact time for Satan's fall, it is clear that it happened after God created the world and before he tempted Adam and Eve, as the book of Genesis says. At the end of the sixth day, God said that everything in creation was very good, even the angels who had not fallen. This suggests that Satan and his followers fell sometime between the end of creation and the temptation in Adam's garden. According to Matthew the 14th and Revelation the 14th, Satan had angels fighting with him and following his orders. This shows that there was a clear hierarchy and division between the angels who stayed true to God and those who were swayed by Satan's promise of power and freedom. Imagine a war in heaven with Michael and his angels fighting Satan and his followers directly. This shows that the vision was very full of shock and anger. The phrase, "the iniquity of their trade," in Ezekiel suggests that Satan not only showed himself, but also actively hired other angels by promising them a high place under his control if they stayed faithful. This trick shows that someone planned ahead to upset the balance of power in heaven and take the holy throne for themselves. The discovery that Satan made was terrible for both him and the angels that followed him. In Revelation 12:4, Satan's fall is powerfully shown by his tail dragging a third of the stars in heaven. This is a visual picture of the large number of angels who joined his cause. These angels, who were once holy and perfect, were sentenced to a life of spiritual decline and separation from God for all time. Satan's fall makes us think deeply about what evil is and whether God would allow such a rebellion to happen. The evil that Satan brought into the world affected both angels and people, but it is important to remember that God is clean, just, and perfect in every way, as is stressed in the Bible. God doesn't make evil, but he does give made things free will so they can choose their own ways, even if those decisions cause them to fall and be cut off from God. Because he is fair, God did not let evil go unpunished. The Bible story of Satan's rise and fall also talks about salvation and revival. In God's plan, there is both the punishment of evil and the gift of salvation through Christ, who is above and below all other forces. With this in mind, the fact that evil exists makes God's kindness, forgiveness, and justice stand out even more. Satan's fall is a sad story that shows what happens when you are proud and don't obey God. It also shows how complicated creation is and how God set up a moral order in which the freedom God gave to made beings comes with big responsibilities. By knowing how bad Satan's rebellion was, we are asked to think about our own place in the world, our connection with God, and our ultimate fate. In this part of the story of Satan's fall, we think about what temptation is, how powerful God is, and what will happen as a result of Satan's sin. These things are very important for understanding the divine order and justice that wins out in the end. As James 1:13 says, the Bible makes it clear that God is not the cause of temptation and can't be pulled in by evil. There is no temptation from God. It comes from people's flaws and wants. Also, parts of the Bible like Isaiah 41:4 and 43:13 make God's power and authority even stronger by calling out to all generations from the beginning and proving that he has complete control over everything in the world and history. As the one who made everything, God has complete power over the world. In order to understand that no act of resistance can happen without God's permission, not even Satan's, you must first understand this truth. God does things that no one can stop. Even though evil seems to be winning for now, his plans and goals will be carried out in the end. The book of Revelation makes it clear what will happen to Satan in the end. Chapter 20, verses 10-15, talks about how the devil, the beast, and the false prophet were all thrown into the lake of fire, where they will never be free from pain. This lake of fire represents being cut off from God forever, and it is where people whose names are not put in the book of life will end up. Satan used to be a guardian angel and chosen one. He was very close to God and led praise from heaven. The concept of free will gives us a solution to the question of how such a powerful being could be evil. God gave Lucifer and the other angels free will because he believes that spontaneous worship is more important than forced worship. Lucifer's choice to fight against God and try to take over his power was a terrible use of his free will. Lucifer's disobedience got him kicked out of heaven and will finally land him in the lake of fire to be judged and punished forever, just as God planned. Not only will he suffer this, but so will the angels who joined his rebellion and all people who turn away from God's gift of redemption through Christ. The choices that people, whether they are angels or humans, make have effects that last forever. People who reject forgiveness and join Satan's revolt will end up in the lake of fire with the same people. This belief stresses how important it is for people to make their own decisions and take duty before God. Lastly, it's important to remember that God is still powerful and in charge, even though there is evil and revolt. This heaven says over and over that God does things so that we can know that He is Lord, that His will win out in the end, and that everyone will recognize His power. This thought about Satan's fall tells us that even though it may look like evil wins sometimes, God's justice is certain, and He will win over evil in the end. The account of Satan's resistance teaches us a lot about what evil is and how important moral choices are. It also shows that God is in charge and fair in everything. As the story of Satan's fall from grace as a favored cherub to ultimate humiliation as a doomed enemy comes to a close, this result shows how much God controls everything and how pride and rebellion have very serious consequences. We can see how a being who was made to mirror the beauty and wisdom of God could fall so far because he wants to rise above his original state. Although Satan was made with unmatched beauty and intelligence, his pride turned him into a bad person and set him on a path of rebellion and destruction. His story shows very clearly what happens when pride gets in the way of being thankful and obedient to God. He who was one of the highest in heaven chose to disobey the greatest authority, which got him kicked out and sent down. Truth number one: God is in charge of everything, even the forces of evil. The story of Satan proves this. God is in charge of everything that happens in the world, from the beginning to the end. Knowing that Satan is finally subject to God's will, even though he has brief power in the world, is comforting for everyone who has to deal with evil. It's clear from Satan's story that pride is harmful and dangerous. That kind of pride is bad and dangerous. It not only brought Satan down, but it still is a trap for many people. Knowing that Satan's uprising was driven by pride helps us spot and fight these traits in our own lives. Through the Holy Spirit, we are told to be humble and serve others, and to fight the urges to be proud that could lead us away from God's road. Satan's end is already set in stone. His death will not only be a punishment for what he did against God, but it will also show that good will win in the end. Revelation paints a vivid picture of his punishment in the lake of fire, where he and his followers will suffer forever. This everlasting judgment is not only a punishment, but also the end of sin and the showing of the world God made. Satan's fall from power to exile is a strong wake-up call for all of us. It teaches us about God's authority, how bad sin is, and how important it is to obey and be humble. When we think about Satan's story, we should look at our own lives, the decisions we make, and our hearts to make sure we are living in line with God's will and under His loving control. As this trip through Satan's story comes to an end, we are told that God is the one who weaves all stories into the fabric of the universe. He is the final author of everything, and even the saddest characters and the darkest stories are used to show how great, fair, and pure He is. In the end, Satan's story isn't just about his fall and punishment. It's also about God's amazing power and His final win over evil. This ending, which is both sad and hopeful, makes us think about our place in relation to God and encourages us to choose every day the path of truth and loyalty, moving away from pride and revolt and toward God's light and life. We hope that this trip through Satan's story has taught you something useful about what happens when you are proud and don't follow the rules. If you learned something from this, please share it with your family and friends so that more people can learn how important it is to be humble and obey God. Like it, tell us what you think, and stay with us for more spiritual finds. Thank you for following us to the end of this incredible story. See you in the next video. May God be with you always. Amen.